Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. Today, everything you see is for sale. Some of these watches are not listed publicly on our website, so this is the only way to find them online. To reach out for the pricing of any of these watches, reach out to me at tmosso at thewatchbox.com. We do buy, trade, and sell. So if you're looking to trade or sell, we're always looking to build inventory. Sell me one watch, sell me your entire collection. We wire cash instantly, no upper limit on value paid. To buy, trade, or sell, or just to ask inquiring questions, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's jump straight into the watch I promised you. Kanro, one of the sekki, or micro seasons of Japan. This, of course, being the autumnal variant of the Seasons series from 2021. The Kanro, or the SBGE 271, is from the Elegance collection, so it has this vintage 1960s inspired case. Zaratsu black polished on its flanks, and as you can see, the details immaculate, optically smooth and mirrored. The flanks of the 40.2 millimeter case, polished against a spinning tin plate. This is an art that takes about 3 years to learn and master at Grand Seiko. So you have a hand-finished case. That's before we even get to the dial. Now you can see well that it's a lovely texture with a black lacquer across the top to give it a glossy gleam, and the individual indices as well as the hands are works of art in their own right, twinkling like cut gems with sharp facets, razor-like Dauphine hands with satinated tops and polished flanks. You can see the same treatment lavished across each one of the hour indices. We have this lovely combination of gray and black, a sort of anthracite brushed matrix as the base of the dial, designed to look like the autumn sky. And then we have the gold of the moon represented in the printing of the GMT track, as well as the rose gold GMT hand. Now this is a dual time watch with spring drive, so you can see that perfectly smooth glide of the spring drive movement. It doesn't have an escapement, so it moves smoothly. It doesn't stop and start like a Swiss lever. Now as you can see, I'm able to change my local time while everything keeps in motion until I hack the movement. Now I can set the 24-hour hand, the 12-hour hand, and of course I have a power reserve indicator on the dial side. It is an automatic winding watch, though I can wind it manually if I so choose. 100 meters water resistant in spite of being a relatively dress-inspired take on Grand Seiko, and you can see that unidirectional governing wheel that is the signature of the spring drive technology. It creates an induced electrical current that wakes up a quartz circuit. The quartz circuit then applies electromagnetic force to break the governing wheel if it runs too fast. So you have quartz accuracy to plus or minus 15 seconds a month, but it is entirely mechanically driven, no batteries, capacitors, or stepper motors. We'll throw this watch on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, and as you can see, it wears well. It's suitable for smaller wrists. It's a nice, handsome all-arounder. It's both a dress watch and a sports watch, and of course, with the full bracelet, you have no concern about getting this 100-meter watch wet. It has a lovely box section sapphire, which you can see evokes the plexiglass of Grand Seiko watches of the 1960s. Now, let's take another look at Grand Seiko's nationally representative, or I should say culturally reflective and optically reflective dial styles. This right here, SBGW 273. It is a Elegance collection dress watch, 37.3 millimeters in diameter, 140. It is an anniversary series watch, 140 pieces being offered. This is the second take, a USA limited edition on the Kirazuri effect, or the shiny painting effect. So you can see that there's this roughed, rusticated pattern across the metallic surface of this dial, which represents the verdure of the Genbi Valley in spring. It's a very subtle, almost sherbet green with metallic undertones, and you can see that the quality of the indices in the hands is no less than what we saw on the SBGE 271 a moment ago. Now, the watch is a manual wind 9S64 caliber, which you can see through the case back, 3 days of power reserve, 6 positions of adjustment. So unlike, say, a chronometer, which only needs to be adjusted in 5 positions, this is 6, giving the watch greater precision as you wear it on your wrist or sit down on your dresser at night. It too has the Zaratsu polished case flank with that hand-finished shine. And when I throw it on my wrist, you can see the fit is outstanding. Once again, this is really a unisex watch at just over 37 millimeters in stainless steel. It's a beautiful and evocative tribute to the Grand Seiko watches of the 1960s, which was Grand Seiko's first decade as a brand. And you have that lovely dial, which may be one of the best green dials of the last year. Going high horology and turning the globe over to Switzerland, we stick with de Bethune. Now, this company right here has been one of my longtime favorites. I'm particularly fortunate that about 6 years ago, I picked this out as my favorite brand, and now Watchbox actually owns them. So I technically work for the extended de Bethune family, and I'm thrilled. This watch comes from long before that development. This is the DBS model, which co-founder David Zanetta designed to look like a vintage pendant watch, and that's exactly what we have here. We have the cabochon style or ogival lug tips down at the bottom. There's some fingerprints on here, I apologize. And you can see they are one of the surviving elements of the original DB1 chronograph of 2002. Now we also have a hinge lug up at the top, and it's a bullhead winder like a pendant watch. Taking a quick look at the dial, there is a lot going on. De Bethune makes its cases, movements, and dials, though this watch doesn't have a conventional dial. There's a moon phase down at 6 o'clock, which is going to be 1/2 blued steel, 1/2 white palladium. It has an adjustment interval of over 1,112 years. It is a spherical moon phase, as you can see. There's also a yoke made of platinum and blued titanium, and the idea here is to minimize the effect of temperature change on timing and also place as much of the mass outboard as possible. You can see it's not a balance wheel because it's not circular. It is a yoke, and it is patented. We have cabochon of titanium, all fired blue, and yes, the process for bluing the titanium is patented, and they sit in a lovely frosted chapter ring for the hours. The center bridge over the barrel bridge has been black polished, and you can see the same treatment, firing and black polishing, has been rendered on the hands. 2 mainspring barrels. You can see there's a case back power reserve indicator. The watch has a power reserve manual wind of 6 days. You could see Côte de Bethune, sort of like Côte de Genève, but they're mirrored from side to side on the barrel bridge, and then a full black polished balance bridge that's continuously rounded. And you can see there's 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs to maximize the chronometric potential of this watch, even in the face of shock, and to make it more durable. There are self-adjusting elements to the twin barrels and a slipping bridle style mainspring, so you cannot accidentally overwind this manual wind watch, and it is quite slim at just over 11 millimeters thick and just over 46 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip. So I will show you how thin this watch is on the wrist. De Bethune absolutely not compromising. You can see, although avant-garde in its style, right down to the mirrored anglage, which is true rounded hand-finished anglage. This is a traditionally finished watch. Throw it on the wrist, and I found that the DBS, which launched in 2005, is one of the absolute best-fitting de Bethune watches. In addition to being quite thin, it's very narrow across the wrist. 46 millimeters and change means this is one for male and female wrists, as well as for those who might have smaller wrists. The timepiece, a gloriously rare watch from the early days when de Bethune was making scarcely more than 100 watches a year. These are highly collectible now. Taking a quick look at perhaps a more mainstream aesthetic, I often recommend that people who want to get into de Bethune but aren't into the horological avant-garde start with the DB25 collection, and that's exactly what we have right here with the DB25 moon phase. Now, the watch includes 2 complications. One is the spherical moon phase, which you can see here is half blackened and half white. So we have that same moon phase in sphere form that's been patented. We have a rosette-style guilloche, and all the guilloche is done in-house at de Bethune on a rose lathe. We have a toroidal hour and minute track that's printed in silver. The dial is anthracite, and you can see that the hands have been black polished. Now turn it over, and you can see that second complication. Moon phase on the front, power reserve indicator on the back, and again, we have that yoke-shaped balance wheel. We have the hand-finished Côte de Bethune, as well as the mirrored beveling and the satination on the wheels with a silicone escape wheel for reduced friction and improved timekeeping. We still have the triple parachute shock protection. We just have a much more conventional dial and conventional non-floating lugs that make this a more accessible watch. At 44 millimeters, it's broad, but it's also thin. It sits large and flat across the wrist. I would recommend a wrist of at least 15 centimeters circumference to wear this watch, but you can see it will fit easily underneath the cuff. A lovely DB25 timepiece, as you can see, in white gold. And again, they're making their cases, their dials, and their movements in-house. Over in Schaffhausen, in the German-speaking northeastern portion of Switzerland, there are two manufacturers. One makes 100,000 watches a year. That's IWC. The other makes 1,500 a year, and that's Moser. Now, Moser, of course, makes a variety of different styles, of which this might be the most broadly appealing. A lovely vintage officer's watch look with a overtone of pilot watch style from the 1930s. This is the Heritage Center Second. It has the company's signature fume dial, which fades from light to dark, and it has their funky blue color, which is a color that is light blue at the center and almost navy blue black nearly at the edge. Look carefully and you can see that the numerals are actually solid blocks of luminova placed on the dial. It does have hacking seconds, though for purists, this is a no-date dial. It's also remarkably well loomed, and I'm going to show you that now. And you can see those solid blocks of lume on the dial do actually stand above the dial because they have length, width, and height. Taking a quick look at the watch, you'll note it has wire-style lugs. It's 42 millimeters in stainless steel. We have these coined profiles on the case flanks. And then on the reverse side, caliber HMC 200, which is a manufacturer automatic winder that has a 3-day power reserve, hacking seconds, and then for shock tolerance, a relatively thick construction, a full balance bridge, and a free-sprung balance. And DB25 makes the tough parts of the movement, like the free-sprung balance, the hairspring, and the escapement. They're doing all of that in-house. An easy watch to wear because it is wire lug and 42 millimeters, the lugs are barely there, and the watch wears like a 42 millimeter lugless round watch. Think wire lug Radiomir, and you have the approximate idea. Now, this watch does fit underneath the cuff. It could be a dress watch, but this is a vintage sports watch style. Officer's watch, pilot's watch, field watch, that sort of idea, with the aesthetic of a pocket watch that has been converted into a wristwatch. Well, that's a watch that looks backward. This is a watch that looks forward, a spoof of the Apple Watch. The Moser Swiss Alp watch launched in 2015 as a send-up of the world's most famous smartwatch. The watch here is a 50-piece limited edition, blackened steel. It is DLC. It has, once again, the fume fade and the funky blue dial. And here you can better see the sunburst. We have applique polished indices. The watch, once again, features hacking or stop seconds, blackened hands. You can see that the watch is approximately 38.5 millimeters wide and 51.5 millimeters lug to lug, though again we get those Radiomir-like wire-style lugs. Caliber HMC 324. It has a 4-day power reserve, and it's actually a little bit more upscale compared to the 200 that we just saw. Not only is this movement properly sized and shaped to fit the case, which is the mark of a true manufacturer tailoring a movement to a case, but it has an overcoil hairspring. It beats at the aesthetically pleasing rate of 18,000 vibrations per hour. There is a case-back power reserve indicator, and then we have a solid gold escapement, 14 karat gold to reduce friction and improve power reserve, and then we also have a platform assortment, which means the balance, the staff, the hairspring, and the escapement are on a separate platform that can be lifted out and replaced with a pre-serviced, pre-adjusted unit, so when the watch goes back for service at Moser's regional affiliates around the world, it comes back to you more quickly. On the wrist, it's thin, just over 10 millimeters thick, and again, 51.5 millimeters, but that's from lug to lug, which doesn't truly measure the footprint of the watch on the wrist. It's smaller than that. Not too broad. This is a watch that is for those who have a sense of humor. People are going to say it looks like an Apple Watch. That's the idea. You and your watch are in on the joke. The rest of the watch collecting fraternity doesn't always get this watch, but it is exceptionally rare, with Moser only building a few dozen examples of this watch per year. It's one of their scarcest series, and it has been discontinued. We're going mass market here, but we're not selling out. Two soulful pieces with color and character from Omega. So what we have right here is the 2017 Omega Seamaster Aqua Terra Golf Edition. Rory McIlroy right here. And this is, of course, the counterpart to the Sergio Garcia. This one featuring Rory's favorite colors, silver, black, and orange. Now, this is the post-2017 version of the Aqua Terra 41. So 41 millimeters in steel, 150 meters water resistant. You can see it's got the new lateral teak deck style and the date at 6 rather than vertical and 3. We have a crown that's much less recessed in the case flank than it was pre-2017. And we have a NATO-style strap, albeit one that buckles like a conventional strap with a conventional pin buckle, so you don't have to worry about the gooseneck fixture that normally encumbers users of NATO straps. This is just like a conventional pin buckle. The watch has a 60-hour power reserve. It is effectively amagnetic, and it's quite well loomed. As you can see, this is a watch that is a true sports watch with a loomed seconds hand, and the watch features blackened hands and indices for contrast on the silver-white dial. Now, you can put a conventional strap on it if you wish to see the caliber inside. It's the 8900 family. Throw it on the wrist, and you can see a watch on a NATO wears differently, and I'll demonstrate that here. It's got a little bit more wrist presence, but it's a stripped-down, sporty look. Of course, the NATO strap is so named because of its creation for and used by North Atlantic Treaty Organization militaries. It's a rugged and rustic style. You can always put this on leather if you want to dress it up for the golf club or the yacht club. Now, let's take a look at a watch that came out in 2006, well, 15, because 2013, the dark side of the moon came out, 2014 came the gray side, and then the side became a collection in 2015, and this is the dark side of the moon vintage black. There was also a black, there's the vintage black, we've got a white side of the moon, many different takes, but this watch right here is vintage evocative. It's got lots of fauxtina, and it's not bashful about it. 44.25 millimeters in feather-light ceramic. I should mention that if you don't like scratches on your watch, get a ceramic watch. Ceramic watches are basically indestructible as long as you don't do something stupid and shatter them. And if you ask, is ceramic durable enough for my wrist? You can answer that question. Have you ever shattered a sapphire crystal on your conventional luxury watches? No? Then ceramic is good for you. Now, there is plenty of lume here, as you can see. Unlike the black, which uses black superluminova, this one is quite legible at night. You could see the insert in the crown is loomed, and the tachymeter scale also loomed. The chronograph seconds hand is also loomed, and that should just be universal on sports chronographs. The watch has a lovely rustic vintage-style calfskin strap. You can see there's a gusset sewn in to avoid gouging. We have a clasp that features a buckle in ceramic. So because this is going to be under your wrist when the watch is on your wrist, a lot of times companies will get cheap, and Hublot and Tag are notorious for doing this. They'll give you some sort of DLC metal buckle with a ceramic watch. As a result, the buckle will age and look ugly, even though the watch doesn't. Well, here, Omega feels confident enough to make the buckle, or at least the top of the buckle, out of ceramic, so you can scratch it all day and not leave a mark. The rest of the clasp features a titanium swing arm, and then you tuck all excess length underneath. You notice there are no minder loops on the strap. That's because all the extra length goes underneath and creates a very clean look when it's on the wrist. I'll give you a quick wrist shot here. We'll zoom out a little bit because it's a big watch. Although it's 44.25, I have no trouble wearing it because it's short across the wrist at just about 50 millimeters lug to lug, and it's very light, being almost all sapphire and ceramic. 60-hour power reserve, vertical clutch, column wheel, coaxial CUSC certified chronometer, anti-magnetic, and you have this wonderful time zone feature, which is also present on the Aqua Terra that I showed you, but both of them feature this ability to set the hour hand independently while the watch continues to keep time. And I should mention that the watch is a triple register chronograph. If you look carefully, you can see coaxial chronograph hour and minute hands at 3 o'clock. So you get the nice clean look of a twin register chronograph, but you get the triple register with the chronograph hours, minutes, and seconds. And if you look carefully, you can see zirconium oxide, the chemical symbol of ceramic, underneath the hands, because the dial is made of lustrous, scratch-resistant ceramic. It is slightly matted compared to the dark side of the moon, so it doesn't reflect as much light, so it's not as lustrous, but it does have a wonderful character to it, somewhere between matte and an aged lacquer dial. That's how it comes across. You can also see that the hands have been coated with nickel anthracite and then brushed so they don't reflect brightly the way polished metal would. Beautiful attention to detail on this watch from Omega. IWC gives you other options, though. Let's say you want a smaller watch. Let's say you want to go 39 millimeters. Let's say you want something that's surface swimmable, has a degree of anti-magnetic protection, and the most quixotic of all features, blowout and decompression protection. So this watch, if it's in a cockpit of an airplane or at the cabin of an airplane that explosively decompresses, the watch will not eject its seals or its sapphire. More than you need, but luxury is about getting more than you need and more than you expect. This is the Pilot's Watch Spitfire Bronze. Bronze, 60 meters water resistant with a screw-down crown, anti-magnetic, and with a lovely olive green military-inspired dial. You can see the hands are beautifully gold-plated. We do a loom shot here. This is part of the 2019 collection of IWC Pilots watches. They relaunched the Pilots watches and the entire Spitfire collection that year. This is based on the traditional Mark series, and this model, which represents reference 326802, is nice and thin in profile with simple case lines, form-following function, and an impressive 3-day power reserve. It also has a quick set and hacking seconds, so you can set it quite precisely. On the wrist, it's broad for a 39, that is lug to lug it's broad, but it's got a lovely and evocative IWC Mark series aesthetic that is simply timeless. If you're going to buy an IWC watch and you want IWC's icon, then you get yourself a Portuguese or you get yourself a Mark series, and this is one of the most interesting takes on the Mark series collection. Well, technically not a Mark, it is very much cut from that cloth. Now, another Pilot watch, if we can call it that, because it's more of an all-arounder, is the Sinn 104. Now, this is a 104, a 41 millimeter steel watch that has a number of attractive elements. First, you can see there is a bidirectional rotating Pilot-style bezel and a handsome dial in matte black with syringe-style white varnished hands. So with this bezel, you have an impromptu 60 to 0 count down timer. You can see how the scale is a mission timer style bezel. It actually counts down. Now the dial, of course, is simple, but you'll note made in Germany, and it is made in Germany, not Glashütte or East Germany like most luxury German watches, but out of Frankfurt, the financial capital of continental Europe. You have a double quickset here, and you can see this is a bilingual watch. It speaks 2 languages, its native language, as well as English. Now the watch is substantially water resistant, down to 200 meters. That's uncommon for Pilot's watches. It has a lovely EZM1 inspired case flank, and you can see here's my EZM11, just to give you an example of what that means. This is the most distinctive case design that Sinn has ever created. And the original EZM1 was created in 1997 for the German Federal Customs Enforcement Unit, and the case shape with those thrusting angular beveled lugs has found its way into many of the most recognizable and sought Sinn watches. You can also see the bezel is held on by screws. This is called a captive bezel. It's a very sturdy construction, so you can't accidentally snap the bezel off. Now the watch is quite thin, quite water resistant, quite well regulated, and of a high grade internally. As Sinn takes a, let's see how close we can get here, Sinn takes a top grade Sellita SW200 or ETA 2824, and they case it up and they adjust it in-house like a chronometer would be. So top grade is one down from chronometer, but with the degree of adjustment that's lavished on this watch, it runs just as well. A very tough automatic winder with a quick set date, hacking seconds, and a 38-hour power reserve. And you can see Sinn makes its own cases, bracelets, and clasps, and it includes a full fold-out diving extension if you do want to wear this watch over a wetsuit or a dry suit, or even a flight suit, as it is more of a pilot's watch than a dive watch. And you can see that the bracelet is nicely made with removable links fixed by hex screws and a handsome contrast between polished and satination. We'll throw this watch on my wrist. It wears well. At 41 millimeters, it's a perfect size for me, and I would imagine a perfect size for many. It's a sports watch without being excessively boisterous. It's a timepiece that could easily be sober enough to wear with a suit and tie, as the combination of steel, black, and white wears with anything. And it's even a pretty thin watch, as you can see, only about 12 millimeters thick. This is an all-arounder. I wouldn't necessarily call it a unisex option because it does seem fairly broad with the bracelet, and it's got a meatiness to it that doesn't favor a dainty wrist, but it's definitely a nicely sized middle ground between an aggressive sports watch and a formal dress watch. And of course, it has the day and the date. Okay, Rolex. Much Rolex. We have so much Rolex here at the Watch Box, but it's rare that something catches my eye to the point that I want to feature it here on the show. So we have a Sea Dweller, a mid-90s T-Series, 16600, a much-loved 40 millimeter pre-Cyclops Eye, pre-Deep Sea take on the traditional Rolex premium diver. Always a little bit more deluxe than the sub. The Sea Dweller features a deeper rated diving depth as well as its signature helium escape valve, the gas escape valve, for those of you who are saturation divers. Now when I say pre-Cyclops, of course with the 43mm Sea Dweller, we got the first ever Cyclops magnifier on a Sea Dweller model. Well, this watch does not have that. This watch has the conventional thicker crystal, no magnifier, lacquered dial, white gold hands. Because this was a circa 1995-1996 watch, you can see it is also a tritium dial, and it has a 120 click bezel. The watch is new enough that with proper servicing, it can still be used as Hans Wilsdorf or his ghost would have intended. It can still be used as a sports watch and a diver. You can see the bracelet is in very good condition. By this point, the Sea Dweller would have had solid end links, and the case I would rate as about a 7.5 or 8 out of 10. As you can see, the lugs are full and symmetrical, and while the watch has been refinished, at no point on this case is there a spring bar protruding out from the lug flank. That's one way to judge whether the watch retains sufficient original metal to be collectible. So not a museum piece watch, but very much a wearable collectible, a daily driver, if you will, that has some long-term upside. Now, throwing it on the wrist, the watch is comfortable. It's also relatively short across the wrist. In spite of the early example of Rolex solid end links, this is still a 40mm watch, and it wears like a 40mm Submariner. So it's a rare Sea Dweller that I would say a woman could wear as well as a man. And again, this is really a subtle piece. It's not for the guy who wants to be recognized as a Sea Dweller wearer by the general public. No, if you want to be recognized for your Sea Dweller, you get a 43 or a 44. If you want something that only Rolex fans will know is not just another Submariner, then you want this. JLC makes some gorgeous watches, but if you want the JLC, you're going to get yourself a Memovox wrist alarm or a Reverso. And since 1931, JLC has built many, many Reversos. I like to say that although you could make the case for the tribute to 1931, there really is no definitive Reverso model. This is distinct from Rolex, which has its Daytona sub and GMT Masters in steel, Omega with its Moonwatch, Patek with its Nautilus, or its Calatrava 5196. Well, there is no archetype of the Reverso, which means you can own any Reverso variant and still have the JLC icon, giving you a lot of flexibility to own the brand's core product, but still tailor to your personal tastes. So in the late 2000s, JLC launched some big Reversos, and the 976 was one of the largest. This model features an adaptation of the 975 Auto Tractor movement. This one has been shaped and sized for the Reverso case, and they've removed the automatic winding system. Now you can see it very much has a sports watch architecture, as the Auto Tractor was a movement designed for sports watches, so it had a full balance bridge and a free sprung balance like a Rolex would. This is one of very few Reversos that has a full balance bridge and a free sprung index and hacking seconds, but it has another feature that you don't find on other Reversos, and this again is a function of its relation to the 975 Auto Tractor, and that is this time zone adjustability, where the watch is keeping time, but I can adjust as I travel forward or backwards. And once again, hacking seconds on a Reverso, super rare. So I mentioned it's a big Reverso. How big is big? By the way, 48-hour power reserve. Well, big here means about 48.5 millimeters from lug to lug and about 29.2 millimeters from side to side. It's just over 10 millimeters thick, so it's not a thick watch, but it is broad on the wrist. I'm going to recommend you have a wrist larger than mine. I think you need a wrist of 17 centimeters circumference to wear this watch ideally. I mean, maybe your wrist is my size and you think this looks just fine. That may be your opinion. In that case, 16 centimeters circumference might work. But for me, this needs just a little bit of a bigger wrist than mine because it is pushing right out to the edge. You can see the iconic Reverso case profile, which is a combination of these lovely squared off conical lug ends and then this vaulted flank with the gadroons that wrap all the way around. The first Reverso created in 1931, and some variant of this case design has featured on every one since, with the exception of the Reverso 2 and the Squadra. Those were square, but the rest have been very much in this mold. Now here's a model that first came out in the late 1990s. Reverso Day Date. JLC has been building calendar wristwatches since at least the caliber 412 in the 1930s. And this watch, which has a Francophone calendar, is very much in that vein. Now it is lovely and Art Deco with a vertical brushed satin grained metallic silver dial. The inner dial is frosted frosted. The sub-register has a concentric graining, and then we have these lovely erect, vertically oriented Art Deco style Arabic numerals. We have a pointer style date internally, and you can actually see that the watch includes a red on white date disc. So we actually have a radial date, and so this is a wonderful take on the day and the date, because if you go back to those 30s calendar wristwatches, you will find that it is always red printing on white or silver for the day and the month complication. That's what we have here, jeudi. Now, of course, the watch is built in the Reverso Grand case size, which was the large Reverso during the 90s. So it's 26.2 millimeters across, and then it is 42.3 millimeters from lug to lug. So I've owned two Reversos in this case size, and for me, this is the perfect size. This is really ideal if your wrist is between 16 centimeters circumference and 13.5 centimeters circumference. A real handsome fit, a flat watch in spite of the rotating case. It will fit underneath the cuff. This is very much a dress model with the silver dial and the rose gold, though with the rose gold it seems contemporary. It's not frumpy by any means. This isn't a yellow gold watch. You can see internally the chassis is engine turned. The case back here is mirrored and buff, and you can use this as a canvas for engraving, enameling, lacquering, customization, and you can send these watches back to JLC and they will indulge you with a custom design, and they will work out what you want prior to committing. This watch features JLC's first generation deployant clasp, so I'm going to say this model was probably made sometime between about 1998 and 2001 if it features this clasp design. Reach out to me, of course, if you like any of these watches, tmosso at thewatchbox.com for pricing, but we're not done. We have two in rose gold from FPJorn, starting with this, the no longer available 38 millimeter Chronomet Souffron. So the Chronomet Souffron is FPJorn's take on a minimalist, traditional wrist chronometer. He uses the term chronomet, insisting that although he does not COSC certify his watches, his internal standards are higher. Well, let's see how that's accomplished. First of all, we have the 38 millimeter case, which looks great on this watch. A 56-hour power reserve, blued hands with that biomorphic taper that Jorn has implemented. The watch, of course, rose gold, and it has a solid rose gold movement. So the bridges and plates are made of the same precious metal as the case. That adds impressive weight. So achieving chronometry, starting with twin mainspring barrels, not for an extravagant power reserve, but because twin barrels even out the torque release from the mainsprings, so you don't get the surge of balance amplitude and fast running that a normal watch gets when fully wound, and you don't get the big drop off in amplitude after 24 hours that you would get even with a Rolex that has a single barrel. Now, it moves downstream through a hidden drivetrain. You can see there's no visible means of transmission between the barrels and the escapement. The drivetrain actually runs underneath the dial to open up this channel with a lovely sun ray on the base plate. Then we have two different sizes of engine turning or pourlage. The balance is adjusted in 6 positions, one more than a standard chronometer. The balance is physically large. So it has an inertia of 10.10 milligrams per centimeter squared, which is substantial and about 3 times what you'll find on a standard sized balance wheel. It's also free sprung for durability, so shocks or concussions to the wrist will not alter the timing of the watch. You can see that there's a bevel on the edge of the bridges. There's Cote de Genève across the tops, and all the screw heads are black polished. You can also see that this is one of the Eleanor made cases. Before 2008, before mid-2008, FPJorn cases would have been made outside of Paris in France by Eleanor, Jorn's original case supplier. So you can actually see the Eleanor maker's mark right under the crown, and then you see the hallmarks of France as well as Switzerland on the same case. That's another evocative mark. Given that this watch came out in 2005 and those cases were phased out by mid-2008, you know this watch would have been made between 2005 and mid-2008 just by looking at the model and then those maker's marks on the case. Now, this watch might be my favorite FPJorn watch. I'm not totally sure. It vies with the Vagabondage 2 in platinum and the Chronomet Optimum. Now, this watch might be the best tourbillon FPJorn has ever made. Taking a quick look, this is the tourbillon anniversary 30 years. So the anniversary tourbillon 30 years is better known as the T30. The tourbillon that emulates the very first FPJorn watch, a pocket watch from 1983. So this watch came out in 99 pieces in 2013. So the Tourbillon 30-year anniversary includes the layout of that first watch, albeit to a much higher standard of fit, finish, and materials. Taking a look at the case flank, you can see Bjorn has used rose lathe reductive guilloche, not on a dial or a movement, but on the case flank, and the watch is a sandwich of rose gold case back, rose gold bezel, and sterling silver lugs and mid case. So this is an unusual material to use, and one rarely used by FPJorn. The idea is to create the look of age and patina, something you would expect on a pocket watch made in the 80s. You have the guilloche with a lovely sort of rosette or a ricochet pattern on the reverse side, and then you open it up, and the movement is anything but generic tourbillon souverain. You could see it looks like the original FPJorn pocket watch, a twin barrel cox with black polished caps. You can see everything features satination. The base plate is frosted, the wheels feature the satination. The anglage here is some of the best I've seen on FPJorn watches. The blued screws might be the largest I've seen in any watch, and you can see the tourbillon carriage is oversized. It is a 1-minute tourbillon beaten at 21.6. You can see it's free sprung with an overcoil, a feature rarely found on Bjorn watches. All this with a 56-hour power reserve. Remember, the standard tourbillon Souffron pre-2019 had a 42-hour power reserve, and you can see that the base plate has been engraved by hand. So this is a very, very special watch with a Hunter snap caseback. The Tourbillon 30 years, or the T30, is one of the most sought Bjorn watches, and though there is a 10-piece limited edition Platinum T10, the T30, to my eye, is the more attractive and more memorable of the two. That said, I always save the best or most dramatic for last, and this watch is both of those. This is the watch that won the GPHG Aiguille d'Or back in 2015, the Goguel Forcy Tourbillon 24-second Vision. The Tourbillon 24-second Vision makes the tourbillon more visible, and on both sides. You can see there's a lovely domed sapphire over the reverse side that gives you maximum visual access to the underside of the tourbillon bridge. You can see it features a gold chaton fixing the pivot of the tourbillon carriage. It features black polish all the way from edge to edge, wall to wall black polish, mirrored anglage on the edge, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 sharp interior angles where the bevels of the bridge meet. It is a 24-second tourbillon angled at 25 degrees. What this means is that the tourbillon makes a full turn every 24 seconds. Remember, a standard tourbillon is going to be 1 minute. The upper bridge is also black polished. It features 4 more interior angles. It is adjacent to a black polished terminal train, and you can see that there is a ton of this black polish continuing to the center of the fired blue hands and the black polished cannon pinion. The dial, though simple, beautifully blueprinted, and the dial is a disc of solid 18-karat gold. On the reverse side, German silver that's been beautifully rhodium plated to give it a lovely silver tone, brighter than conventional German silver, which tends to be gold in color. And then you can see we have more of those interior angles and no shortage of them in best in the world execution. Others are co-equal with the finishing quality of Goguel Forcy, but I'm not sure any surpasses. This is a limited edition of 22 pieces, and in the 7 years I've been doing this, it's the first one I've encountered. The twin stacked barrels give the watch a 72-hour power reserve, and there's a power reserve indicator on the back. In terms of finish and finery, this is as good as it gets, but it's not as bombastic as a standard Goguel Forcy watch. You can see it's almost understated by the aesthetic standards of Robert Goguel, who handles the design between Goguel and Forcy. It is 43.5 millimeters in diameter, and I remember when I saw this watch winning the Aiguille d'Or back in 2015, I thought there is a Goguel Forcy of a size and a style that I could actually wear. It could even fit underneath the cuff. This truly is as good as it gets on today's show. Remember, reach out to me for pricing. Email me, even if you just want to inquire, even if you just want to chat, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.